Republican U.S. Senate candidate Darryl Glenn, welcome to Next.
Thank you so much.
So, some outside observers have suggested that your campaign has had somewhat of a failure to launch. No big fundraising, financial commitments from national interests. Your polling numbers have not been good. You're campaigning in front of a lot of Republicans talking about a lot of the same things that you talked about in the primary. Is that going to be the approach through the general election?
Well, I would say to those people that they really have been wrong the entire time. We've been out talking to all people. That's the advantage of starting a campaign back in January 2015, going around talking to real people about issues that are happening right now, and they've been wrong about me the entire time. So don't listen to the polls.
Now, at some point, though, you would expect that gap to close if your message is resonating with people. I understand that you've been underestimated at points throughout this process, but at what point would you look at the numbers and say, yeah, if I'm making progress, we need to see it?
Well, I don't look at polls. It's about results. And every single time people have had an opportunity to vote for me, we've been on top. And I think that when you're looking at the national polls, you can see all the convention balance has kind of gone away and things are getting back to normal. What people need to understand, it's Labor Day. Now really people are focused in on the race. So all the early polls really don't matter.
So you're not looking at the polls. You're not concerned with that. You're concerned with the result. The polls would suggest the result is you're going to get smoked. So I guess my question is, for concerned Republicans who are watching, for independents who are trying to figure things out, what is the message that says, I'm resonating, I'm connecting with people?
All you have to do is look at Michael Bennett's voting record. When you start asking people, do they think the Iran nuclear deal was a good vote? Do you think the Affordable Care Act was a good vote? He's willing to double down on those issues. And these are things that are critical to Coloradans. He's on the wrong side of them. If anybody's going to get smoked, it's going to be Michael Bennet.
Do you have any interest in stressing some of your more middle-of-the-road positions? You've described yourself as an unapologetic Christian conservative, but certainly you've been in public life long enough that you must hold a plethora of positions on various things, some of which would appeal more to independents and to moderates. Do you have a plan to stress those positions as we move forward to attract a broader swath of support?
Yeah, and actually if people are paying attention, that is happening, because when you think about my platform, it doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, or unaffiliated. My platform is soundly based in the defense of this country. Energy independence. We should be exploring all forms of energy and not picking winners and losing. And fiscal responsibility. You start needing to address the debt. These are critical issues that Michael Bennet has failed on. You know, our debt has doubled under the Obama administration, and he has actually doubled down on that.
Michael Bennet has a reputation for being somebody who's willing to work across the aisle in Washington. Is that a good thing?
Well, Michael Bennett's idea of working across the aisle is to get Republicans to vote for the Iran nuclear deal and get Republicans to vote for the Affordable Care Act and all the clean water initiatives that are basically causing harm here in Colorado. That's not reaching across the aisle. That's working against the interest of Colorado.
So you think when Michael Bennet says, I work across the aisle, what that is code for is, I convince Republicans to vote for Democratic proposals?
Absolutely, and it's one of these things where I think that people are frustrated with both parties. I can tell you I've talked to enough Republicans where they wanted the Republicans to actually stand firm on issues. But our campaign is about broader issues, because one of the things we aren't talking about is criminal justice reform. That's something I'm very passionate about. Sex trafficking on I-25 and I-70. These are issues that I'm willing to talk about. And the other thing is, when you start thinking about the employment rate, you know, 1 in 5 people of color are basically unemployed or underemployed. And these are issues that I'm willing to address head on and willing to have discussions about. I invited Michael Bennet to have a town hall with me. Let's put microphones on both sides and take questions from the floor. He has yet to take me up on that. I'm willing to do it.
You talk about the unemployment rate in communities of color. Recently, Donald Trump made the pitch directly to African Americans saying, you've been failed by Democratic policies, what do you have to lose? Do you believe that the African American community has anything to lose?
Well, I look at it from the standpoint of going in and actually talking to people here in underserved areas. And I've had those discussions where Michael Bennet hasn't. And when you talk to them and you ask them about their employment rate, they're very concerned about that. They're also concerned about criminal justice reform that nobody is talking about. You can talk about all these policies, but I'm actually in there listening to these issues. And my platform is about helping people.
let's talk specifics on criminal justice reform. What are you proposing?
Well, when you're looking at some of the sentencing guidelines, I think that when you go back to the Clinton administration, a lot of these mandatory sentencings are something that's a critical issue. You also need to look at when somebody is incarcerated, what are they doing internally and within their incarceration to actually reform? We need to be looking deeper into these particular issues and then making sure that when you actually have served your sentence, you have an opportunity to have a job and become a productive citizen again. That's where I think we need to lead, and you don't have a lot of people talking about that.
Would you favor the reestablishment of voting rights for felons?
When you serve your time, you have served your time, and I think that that's important. And it's one of these things.
So that sounds like a yes, that you would be in favor of.
Well, that's the whole purpose of our justice system. It's about providing another person an opportunity after they've served their time.
Mm-hmm. So is that something that you would be looking to lead on in Washington, D.C.? I mean, the Democratic governor of Virginia has taken all kinds of hell for reestablishing voting rights unilaterally in that state. Is that something where you think the Senate should lead, that Congress should lead?
I think that as Americans, we should force that discussion because nobody's talking about it in both parties. And we need to bring people together and use the legislative process to actually talk about a critical issue. And I'm certainly willing to be at the table. When you start talking about things like that, reaching across the aisle, those are areas where I want to bring all people together. When you start talking about what's in the best interest of this country, that's where I want to bring people together and talk about those things. Energy independence, what's doing to jobs in this community, that's where we can talk about these issues.
Just want to tie up that last issue before we move on. Reestablishing voting rights for felons. You sounded like a yes, but I didn't hear a yes. Are you a yes there?
What I think we should do is have a discussion about that. And that's what that's not taking place.
Okay, so not a yes or a no, but something that you'd like to talk about.
We need to talk about it.
Okay. You said that you weren't ready to take a position on TPP, the trade deal, because you hadn't read it yet. Understandable. But tick-tock, we're after Labor Day here. When can voters expect that you will have read it and have taken a position?
Well, here's the issue, is the fact that we don't have an opportunity to further debate it because there's some legitimate concerns that are out there in the community. When you start thinking about that our Constitution would be subservient to another body, that's a critical issue. I am in favor of bilateral agreements. I think that that's a good thing. But I think the American people would actually love to read this document, and it seems like it's being forced down so that it can be rubber stamped. And I think we need to take a time out.
Why not just read it, though?
Well, it's not. It's even just reading it doesn't do enough because we need to debate it. And that's what's missing. And that's the failure of leadership under this administration and under Senator Bennett is not allowing people an opportunity to debate issues and use the legislative process. Why are we always in such a hurry? Because when we're in such a hurry, what that does is creates a level of confusion because people don't have an opportunity to truly research the positives and negative aspects of that.
So I'm hearing you say you're not going to take a position on TPP because you haven't read it, but you're also not committing to read it and take a position.
Well, you have to understand, we aren't going to be given the opportunity. Right now, the way it stands, I'm not in favor of TPP. Let's be clear of that. Because we are not even going to be given an opportunity to vet it. And because they aren't going to address those concerns that people have about making our Constitution subservient to something else.
So you're a no on TPP?
I am absolutely a no right now. Okay. Absolutely.
Okay. The Iran deal. You've been highly critical of Senator Bennett and his vote for the Iran deal. Did you read that deal?
The Iran deal, when you start thinking about it, we could not read that because it was classified.
Sure, you can read it now. You can read the joint agreement. It's 156 pages.
Well, you say you can read everything, but we're still finding out each and every day that there are more side deals that nobody even knew about.
And
but
here's the entire text isn't out there. No, but you said that the reason why you couldn't take a position on TPP is because you hadn't read it. But you have taken a position on the Iran deal, but you haven't read it.
Well, and I've taken a position on TPP, like we just said. Right now, as we stand, let's be clear, it's a no.
You're a no on TPP?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's be clear about that.
Okay.
But the Iran deal, when you start thinking about what's coming out right now, how do you sit there and look at the men and women that serve this country, and you're going to basically give Iran and release that money back to them that could potentially be used against our men and women in armed forces? That, to me, is unconscionable. And Michael Bennett is willing to double down on that particular agreement. And look at the aggressive action that Iran is taking. So for him to then go ahead and reaffirm his commitment to that, that concerns me. And that, to me, is a disqualifier for him to be in office.
Why do you think Senator Bennett was so eager to approve that deal, and Secretary Clinton for that matter? Why?
You're going to have to ask them that question. All I can tell you is when you look men and women that serve this country in the eye and ask them about that, when you look our friends and allies Israel in the face and you ask them about that, they are scratching their head trying to figure out why he accepted that agreement.
If you accept the premise that it's a bad deal, does it seem like something that was made out of ignorance? Are you suggesting there's something nefarious going on? One of your primary opponents, John Kaiser, suggested that Bennett wanted Iran to have nukes. I haven't heard you suggest that.
No, I try to stay away from that. I deal with the facts. And here's the number one deal breaker with me. When you're sitting down across negotiating with somebody and they tell you that they want to kill you, why would you enter into agreement with that?
So you wouldn't talk to our enemies?
No, you're talking about entering into an agreement where you're actually giving them leverage, which you're seeing right now that they're using. And if you're doing any sort of agreement, if somebody across from you says that they want to kill you or kill one of your allies, why would you enter in it? That should have been a deal breaker from day one. And then when you can't even inspect whether or not they're following through with that agreement, that's where you start thinking about there's a lack of leadership there. And that's where my experience as a retired lieutenant colonel is going to come in here and try to make this make sense to the men and women that serve this country.
So explain how it is that foreign policy would work under your direction if we are not talking to people who mean us harm.
Well, you have to understand it is not under my direction. We have a commander-in-chief, and it's our responsibility to be a separate but equal branch of government, and that's where you've seen a failure of leadership. But what you have to have is a overarching policy. You need to understand what the threats are, and I don't think we've done a very good job, number one, articulating that to the military, but even to people in general so that they understand why we have to do certain things. And then you need to make sure make sure that people are properly trained and equipped and have the equipment to be able to do their job. And then rules of engagement that allow them to win. These are basic principles, but they are sound policies that you can then build a budget around to actually support the mission. That's what's the lack of military experience, what you're seeing in Congress.
Let's talk about a domestic issue. Donald Trump recently has reinforced his previously held view on immigration, which would include the deportation of some unknown number of people. Estimated population in Colorado would be slightly larger than the city of Fort Collins. If you're both elected, would you assist President Trump in enacting that policy? I
have my own philosophy when it comes to that. And that's what people should judge me on. Number one, I think you need to recognize that our border is a national security issue. We need to secure the borders. But we also have rules in place that we're not enforcing. And I think that there needs to be some reform within our immigration system because it needs to be more lean and efficient so that when people want to do things the right way, they can do that. But when we do that, then we can have a substantive discussion about things that we need to address. But we're not willing to do A and B. Everybody wants to quickly jump to step C and talk about, the people that are already here. When you actually can show that you've secured the border, you've enforced the rules in place, you do things maybe like E-Verify to make the system even better, then people can be open to using the legislative process to have a substantive debate. But executive orders are not the way to do it. Allowing sanctuary cities is not the way to do it. It's about enforcing the rule of law, but let's do it the right way.
So I guess I'm trying to understand some specifics here. It sounds like what you're saying is until we secure the border, then we can't talk about either deportations or a path to citizenship. Shouldn't voters know where you stand on those issues? Those are big, impactful issues that impact communities and families. Well, what do you think about a path to citizenship for people who are here illegally?
What I think about is we need to focus on the critical issues first. It's kind of like being out on the ocean and you have a hole in the boat and there's water coming through and people want to talk about where to go next. You have to do some immediate things because there are immediate threats to our national security. You have got to secure the border. That's something that should be bipartisan, being able to secure the border and enforce the rules that have already gone through the legislative process.
How about deportations of people who are here illegally? Do we have to secure the border before we know where you stand on that?
When you start talking about rounding up and deporting people, that is not something that I've ever advocated. But what I do advocate is going through that process because when you do that, it's not so hyper-partisan. And then you can really have a substantive discussion about what needs to occur next.
I'm going to wait for the garbage truck to go by here. This will be in the long version that everybody can see online. The shorter version will cut out the garbage truck. Do you want me to hold off for just a quick sec?
1 second.
Yep. We want to make sure that we've got everybody lit properly. And I'm down to my last 2 questions if you're watching for time. Last 2 questions, I promise you.
And I hope we talk about education.
Down to my last 3 questions.
Because my record has been completely distorted on that, and
Okay.
I want to be on record with that.
Last 3 questions. I'll go when you tell me to go, Chris.
Yep.
Good to go whenever?
Yep.
No worries. During a recent campaign stop in Fort Morgan, you told the crowd there that you would, as a Christian, serve the Lord, and in doing so, would serve them as citizens. What happens when God's will and the voters' will goes in 2 different directions?
Well, what people need to understand that, they coexist. When you actually go in there and study that, it's set up to work cooperatively. One doesn't serve over the other one. But what it does show is a level of compassion. Because what I don't see happening right now is when you're listening to the tone of the campaigns and just how people are treating one another, people aren't treating one another with grace, mercy, and respect. And that's the one founding principle when you start thinking about why, what motivates me through faith is it allows me to have a conversation with somebody and learn from them what the issues are, but then I can still treat them with respect, and we leave there with a greater understanding of one another.
I understand that Christian ethos, but what you said was that you would serve the Lord and that in doing so you would serve the voters. You didn't describe it as 2 parallel paths. You said basically that you would do one and that the other would follow. And I think a lot of conservative Christians would say that the will of the voters is quite often opposed to the will of God. So how would you sort that out?
Well, and that's where, you really question whether people really understand. When you hear a statement like that, I don't know what your belief is or any other person's belief, but they do coexist. And that's what you have to understand is, like I've explained, by being open to having conversations with people that you might not normally even affiliate with, but you want to learn from them so that you can learn how to treat them with grace, mercy, and respect and reciprocate that. That's what's important, because that's where good policy comes from. Because what we want to do is create an environment for all of us to coexist.
So that's how you discern the will of the voter, by talking to people. How do you,
That's
Darryl Glenn, discern the will of God?
Well, you have conversations with God. You pray regularly. I think that's extremely important. It's the foundation of who I am. It's the foundation of this campaign, and I'm proud of that. And to me, you're always growing. You're always trying to improve yourself. And, it's a humbling experience because you don't put yourself up on a pedestal. You realize you serve a higher purpose.
All right. Last 2 questions. You wanted to talk about education. Obviously, Michael Bennett has extensive education experience. What is the key differentiator between the 2 of you on education policy?
Well, and I'm glad you brought this up because, Michael Bennett's running these commercials basically saying that I'm trying to gut the education system. What we're trying to do, I'm not willing to cut a dime from education. What I want to do is give states more control. Get that money back down to the states. Because when I know, and I've talked to a lot of people, when you start working with your local control of those particular issues, that's where it's really more focused on the child. And the one thing that I'm disappointed with Michael Bennett is the fact that he won't support vouchers. Because to me, kids should have every single educational opportunity that's out there. Why should somebody or a child, just because of their geographic location, be put at a competitive disadvantage from somebody else? Let's explore all options. Look, I'm a product of the public school system. I'm proud of that. But I've also talked to homeschool parents. I've talked to parents that love charter schools. We need to have all those opportunities out there. The focus needs to be on the child. That's what my record is, and that's what Michael Bennett keeps distorting.
I hear you say we'd move the money from the federal government to the states for education. Would you eliminate the federal Department of Education?
Purposely, we need to actually make sure that we either with block grants. My goal is to be able to free up that money that's being held at the federal level and get it down to the states where it's more properly managed.
Would you eliminate the federal department?
If that ends up being eliminating the Department of Education, then so be it. But what we want to do, again, is keep all the funding that's currently allocated, but get it dispersed down to the states and let them do that.
Understood. Last question, your favorite topic in mind, media bias. You have gone to war with the Denver Post, which I don't know that I want to relitigate, but the fact is you're not talking to the Denver Post. And I keep seeing declined interview, declined interview, declined interview. You accepted this interview. I appreciate that.
Yes.
What have you seen in this campaign in terms of the media's behavior that you think is out of line?
Well, I think it's fair to cover, policy positions. But it shows a lack of sensitivity when you basically end up calling people a liar. And then when you find out something that ends up hurting relatives of that particular individuals. And really, when you start talking about people that want to be moderators, when you think of a moderator, that person is supposed to be objective. Well, we already have evidence, and it's stated in my release, when you start talking about somebody having an inappropriate relationship with Senator Bennett's campaign in the past.
You're talking about somebody who used to work for the Post who had a romantic relationship.
But it's still the Post, and that's just one thing on top of another on how they've conducted themselves. When you have writers that respond back to people that follow on Twitter with drop dead, when you have people that talk to my staff members and basically imply that I've been lying, you then can't say that that person's going to be objective acting as a moderator. The issue is not me versus the Post. The issue is me versus Michael Bennet. And that's why I will debate Michael Bennet anywhere, anytime.
But you described the media as a third opponent in the race.
Well, I described the Denver Post.
No, you said the media.
Well, the media is, but I've not declined any other media interviews. That's why we're here. My point is, when somebody has shown bias, they're disqualified from being a moderator.
And you're done talking to them.
They can talk to my staff, but I am not going to participate in a forum to allow them to appear objective when they're not. When you just go back there and look at their coverage.
Don't all politicians think that the press is biased against them? Hillary Clinton thinks the press has it in for her. Donald Trump thinks that the press has it in for him. Isn't this just what it's like to be in the game?
No, because what happens is you actually need to stand for some principles. What people want is a debate over the issues that they're struggling with at their dinner table. They don't want to know about the charade that's going on with the Denver Post. And when they're there as the moderator, that's a distraction away from the critical issues that people want to address. They can participate, they can sit in the audience, but don't think that they're going to be objective sitting there as the moderator. That's the issue. The issue needs to be my policy versus Michael Bennet. He's not serving Colorado, and why I'm the best candidate. That's the focus.
Darryl Glenn, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it very much. Welcome here anytime.
Appreciate it.